For more than 200 years, the British ruled India with an iron fist. In mid-August 1947, it all comes to an end.
Hindu India and Muslim India must be separated because the two nations are entirely distinct and different.
At the stroke of the midnight hour, India will awake to life and freedom.
British India splits into India and Pakistan, causing one of the largest human migrations in history, with more than 1 million deaths.
People never wanted it. People from both countries suffered.
70 years on, the repercussions are still felt on both sides of the border.
Why was this not planned? Why was this one of the biggest massacres of Asia? This is the gun which was responsible for much of the massacre. They were not firing. They were just killing people with this movement, putting this right across a person's mid part of the body. And children were killed with this. It was this part of the gun which was being used.
Tahir Malik is a sociologist who collects artifacts from the time of partition.
I had this passion to understand our cultural values. That's where I, started collecting newspapers, articles, photographs, especially for the time period of 1940 to 1947. Now, here is a large collection of photographs, but I'm sharing few of them. Here you can see number of children, both male and female, which were killed. Some have starved, but mostly were stab wounds. The bodies were lying all over the place. Disturbs me a lot. Nobody could imagine that they will be leaving their houses and their houses will be burned, their women will be raped and their children will be killed. When political leaders can decide the future of a new nation, they can also decide how this process would take place. Why was this not planned? Why was not security provided to all the people? Why was this one of the biggest massacres of Asia?
Five years before partition, the fight for independence from the British Empire is revving up across India. The movement is led by three British-educated lawyers: Jawaharlal Nehru, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi.
Regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Mahatma Gandhi was a saintly figure who was also a very shrewd politician, an unusual combination. He had a lot to do with both the strategy of non-violent opposition to the British and many of the tactical decisions made to pursue it.
8th of August 1942. Gandhi electrifies the nation with his civil disobedience movement, asking the British to quit India.
तो झगड़ना है तो उसको जाने के बाद झगड़। आज तो उनको यहाँ से रवाना करने के लिए तो हम साथ मिल जाएं। अच्छा है मिल सकते हैं तो नहीं मिल सकते हैं।
Indian political parties ride the wave of sentiment. Closely aligned with Gandhi is the Indian National Congress, led by Jawaharlal Nehru.
Peace has been said to be indivisible. So is freedom. So is prosperity now. And so also is disaster in this one world that can no longer be split into isolated fragments.
Jawaharlal Nehru was the extremely charismatic, popular figure who became one of the most visible leaders of the Congress Party. He was also somebody who was a brilliant intellectual writer, orator, and somebody whose intellectual contribution to shaping the ideas and principles of the Indian nationalist movement was unchallenged.
Nehru and the Indian National Congress rally with Gandhi's message of peace. But there are some who oppose it.
Gandhi's speeches use Hindu language. You know, the chanting, the meditating, this is all very Hindu. It wasn't something that a Muslim would necessarily identify with. While Congress is open to Muslims, you have to remember that its membership was predominantly Hindu and the leadership was predominantly Hindu. So even if they personally weren't biased or bigoted in any way, Muslims didn't necessarily feel at home in the Congress.
There are 20 million Muslims in British India, making up 5% of the population. They are politically represented by the Muslim League, headed by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, himself a former leader within the Indian National Congress.
Freedom must mean freedom both from the British exploitation and Hindu domination. Millions of Muslims will never agree merely to a change of masters.
Jinnah is a very complicated figure and very hard to penetrate, and you have to remember that he changed dramatically over time. When he was a younger man, he was in his 40s, he was a secular nationalist. He favored a united India. He thought the British were trying to divide Muslims and Hindus. Jinnah was sort of a rising political star within the Congress. He was one of the few Muslims there and was being held up as a potential prime minister of a future independent, united India. He thought this transition should be negotiated peacefully with the British. But then Gandhi comes back to India from South Africa, having learned the power of civil disobedience, and sort of takes over the independence movement and, you know, wants to pressure the British using street action. Jinnah, this fundamentally went against his personality, went against everything that he believed about how India should ask for independence, how it should get independence.
Jinnah had been, in his earlier youth, a sort of ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity, as he'd been called at one time. But he felt he could not fit into the kind of mass popular movement that Mahatma Gandhi was leading. And he became increasingly convinced that Muslims of India would require a different and a separate state.
We want the division of India into Hindustan and Pakistan because that is the only practical solution which will secure freedom for both Hindus and Muslims.
ये सब आबादी हमारी ब्रिटिश के टाइम से ही है यहाँ पे।
Purya Singh lives in one of the few Hindu enclaves remaining in Pakistan. In a country of 178 million Muslims, he is one of just 2% of Hindus who call Pakistan their home.
ये हमारा घर है ये, और ये हमारे मसला है यहाँ तक। ये मूर्ति हमारी कुल देवी है, छुपा के रखते हैं हम लोग। हाँ ना, बिल्कुल डर है, हम ये ऐसे एरिया में नहीं ले जा सकते हैं कि ऐसे एरिया में, मुसलमानों के एरिया में नहीं ले जा सकते हैं कि वहाँ पे टोकते हैं, लड़ाई झगड़ा होता है, तो इसलिए हम लोग जहाँ हिंदू मोहल्ला होता है वहाँ ये इसकी पूजा पाठ कर सकते हैं। ये सब मेरी फैमिली है, फैमिली में मेरा भाई लगता था, हमारा पूरा फैमिली उधर है इंडिया में।
Purya's family has been split since partition.
नहीं, हम लोग नहीं बताते हैं, वो हमें बताते हैं कि भाई क्या मसला है, क्या मिसालें मिले, कुछ भी नहीं, हम लोग तो यहाँ खूब अच्छी तरह से आराम से खा रहे हैं, पी रहे हैं अपने आप को, कोई भी हमारा मसला नहीं है।
Today, Poria and his family head to one of the few Hindu crematoriums in Pakistan to perform the last rites for a relative.
बहुत होती है दिल के लेके जावे हम इंडिया, हमारे माँ बाप के पड़े हुए हड्डियाँ हरिद्वार लेके जावे।
ये पूरा इंडिया पाकिस्तान एक था, तो कुछ लोग हमारे यहाँ रहते थे, कुछ वहाँ रहते थे। ये पार्टीशन का मसला हुआ तो कि इसमें झगड़े का मिसाल होगा, इस पर हमारे पे भी बहुत दबाव पड़ते हैं। हमें कोई मुसलमान मार देंगे, हमें कुछ ये कर देंगे, वहाँ मुसलमानों को मारेंगे तो यहाँ हिंदुओं को भी मारेंगे। यहाँ तो हम लोगों को एक बहुत ही मसलन के डर खौफ अपना रहता है।
Traditionally, the Hindus immerse the ashes in the river Ganges in India. But until hostilities die down, they will be kept in a storeroom at the crematorium.
ये 2014 की है, 12 की है, 13 की है, 11 की है, 1-2 मटकी थी, 87 की थी, वो लेके गया, अब लेके गए उन लोगों ने मटकी जो रखी हुई थी, 2 मटकियाँ। जितना देर तक रखा होता है तो उनके आत्माएं भटकती हैं, बोलते हैं कि बस हमें ले जाओ ठंडा करने के लिए, वो से फिर आके लेके जाते हैं।
Pakistan and India separate not just the living, but also the dead.
The subcontinent of India was another potential trouble spot after World War II. Its millions also looked forward to independence after years of passive resistance under British rule.
Most of the independence leaders were in jail throughout most of the war. Gandhi, Nehru, and so on. Jinnah was allowed to stay out and was able to build up his political movement. So he was stronger at the end of the war than the beginning.
The Congress was coming out of the jails, blinking into the sunlight, but the Muslim League had been organized, ready, and prepared. The Muslim League had organized, had gone from a couple of 100,000 members to 20 million strong party by the end of the Second World War.
By 1945, Jinnah is a political force to reckon with. His calls for a separate country for Muslims reach fever pitch.
One India is impossible realization. It will inevitably mean that the Muslim will be transferred from the domination of the British to the caste Hindu rule.
The Mr. Jinnah of 1918 would have been horrified to contemplate the prospect of the Jinnah of 20 years later, who began to articulate separatism and led a movement to carve out a separate state out of India.
Hindu India and Muslim India must be separated because the two nations are entirely distinct and different.
At New Delhi, the 3-member cabinet mission begins its historic quest to find a solution to India's political deadlock.
March 1946. The British cabinet puts up an offer for an independent India in front of its leaders. The plan divides the country into 3 autonomous regions. One, a coalition of princely states, a second region with Muslim majority, and the rest of British India in the third. But Jinnah and Nehru are unable to come to an agreement.
By 1946, Jinnah and Nehru were sworn enemies. I don't think they even enjoyed being in the same room together. Nehru, I think, was very convinced at this point that Jinnah was a cynic and that he didn't really believe in Pakistan. He was doing this for his own, to gather power for himself, and he didn't take his demands seriously.
After months of negotiations, the cabinet mission fails. And Jinnah makes a move that will forever change the relationship between the Hindus and Muslims of India.
Call upon all the leaders of the Muslim faith and the demand generally to organize our people
He's probably there in the down street.
Sociologist Tahir Malik is searching for a man who witnessed the horrors of partition 70 years ago.
उम्र के कोई और लोग हैं जो इधर अब रहते हैं?
नहीं, बस मैं एक आदमी हूँ
और
जो इंडिया से आया हूँ इधर यहाँ हमारे और यहाँ
माइग्रेशन यानी कि पूरा
Sheikh Riaz Ahmed was just 11 years old when his family fled from India to Pakistan.
किस तरह पूरी फैमिली जो थी क्या
पूरा शहर जो था ना हमारा जहाँ से हम आए थे
जी जी
हम तो कितने दिन चलते रहे हैं सूरज निकलता था तो चलते थे जहाँ सूरज ग्रूब होता था वहाँ काफिला रुक जाता था हिंदू तो हमारे साथ चलते थे ये थक के फेंकेंगे तो हम उठा लेंगे सिख हमले करते थे पाने रखी होती थी उन्होंने बस गोली नहीं वो बस तलवारें जैसी नहीं होती ये
जी जी
ये मारते थे वो कत्ल करके भाग जाते थे बस
और सोना वगैरह नहीं ले जाते थे या
जो कुछ होता था वो ले ही जाते थे उसमें क्या तो वो एक फरलांग के फासले पर वो भी खड़े होते थे जब हमारा काफिला चलता था गोरखा मिलिट्री कहते थे मेरा ख्याल है उसको तो लेकिन वो उसके बीच में से बड़े हिसाब से जैसे उसमें छुपे हुए थे पीछे से आगे ऐसे वो हमला कर देते थे तो उसमें जहर वाला पानी पी के फिर बच गए कुदरती बात
वो जहर किसने डाला
हिंदुओं ने हाँ मेरी आंखों के सामने ये मामला हुए
का मकाम होता है आप ख्याल रखें अपना अंदर आई थिंक ही इज द लास्ट ऑफ दोज पीपल हु रियली हैव विटनेस्ड एवरीथिंग displacement from one place to another is always very difficult. People don't understand how much sacrifice each family made.
Settlement of India's tangled affairs presented many problems. As meeting followed meeting, the Muslims insisted on their demand for their own separate state.
The British cabinet mission, in charge of transferring power to a united India, fails to reach an agreement with Indian leaders.
It is clear that land does not meet in some important respects our point of view. And we cannot say or feel that we are satisfied or that we agree with some of the matters destined for the plan.
This plan was doomed because they, the Muslim League, were only looking at it and any other plan as a means to that end of getting a separate country, not as something they were actually willing to work and cooperate with India on.
हिंदुस्तान एक है और भूगोल उसकी एक बनी है और इतने वर्षों से हम एक ही हिंदुस्तान में पड़े हैं तो हिंदुस्तान का खंड कैसे हो मेरा तो दिमाग भी काम नहीं कर सकता है
Nehru and the Congress are against the idea of Pakistan, bringing the negotiations to a standstill.
Nehru didn't give the Muslim demand for greater political representation enough credence, I don't think. He felt like everybody should be treated equally. Nehru and Jinnah are the two most interesting figures in this whole drama because they're very similar people. They were more like each other than either of them were to Gandhi, for instance. They're both secular men, both British educated, like to have a drink from time to time, both very handsome, both fairly vain, very thin-skinned. Under different circumstances, they could have and probably should have been political allies. Perhaps there's similarities that drove them apart in the end. Nehru had sort of taken the place that Jinnah had in India a decade earlier, where he was the young 40-something bridge between the Hindu and Muslim communities and a future leader of India. There was some degree of jealousy that played a role in their relationship. The moment when Jinnah turned against Nehru and against Congress and against a united India, Nehru, who was a classic liberal, started viewing Jinnah as part of the fascist camp.
16th August 1946. Jinnah calls for a direct action day.
call upon all the leaders of the Muslim League and the demand generally to organize our people.
Jinnah used this interesting phrase. He said, I too have a revolver, and we're now going to use it. What he was calling for was a show of strength. He wanted to show the British that the Muslim League had power on the streets all across the country.
In the city of Calcutta, in the east of the country, the Direct Action Day turns violent.
The Muslims demonstrating their direct action, particularly in the city of Calcutta and to a lesser degree elsewhere, decided to show their direct action not just by marching, but by hitting, by stabbing, by shooting. And as a result, hundreds of people were killed.
This started in Calcutta, but then it started spreading. It went to eastern Bengal, it went to UP, it spread to Punjab eventually. And in each of these places where you had violence, the communities that had once lived together and would live across the same street from one another began to disintegrate and began to split apart.
By the end of 1946, more than 30,000 people lose their lives to communal riots.
So if you were a Hindu family in a Muslim neighborhood or a Muslim family in a Hindu neighborhood, you were an easy target. And so your house was burned down, you were killed, and so on. So what people did is they would divide and they would all move to neighborhoods where they're surrounded only by people from their community. And then they would literally put up barricades and post guards outside to protect themselves from this street violence.
Some Muslim League leaders felt the grim satisfaction of having demonstrated both to the Congress and to the British that India would be ungovernable if the Muslim League chose to make it so.
यहाँ पे हम ना जो हमारी सारी कलेक्शंस होती हैं उसको प्रिजर्व करके रखते हैं. इसमें ओरल हिस्ट्री सेल भी बना हुआ है. ओरल हिस्ट्री सेल की वजह जितनी स्टेटमेंट्स होती हैं, कैसेट्स हैं, जो रिकॉर्डिंग्स हैं, वो सब हम यहाँ पे रखते हैं. क्योंकि कुछ इंटरव्यूज़ तो हमने यहाँ पे रखी हैं, कुछ हमारी ना टाइप होने वाली रहती हैं.
Oral history researcher Amandeep Kaur records statements from survivors of partition.
ये देखो, ऐसे ऐसे इंसिडेंट्स देखे तो मेरा रोना निकल आता है. जैसे पूरे जो खूह है वो लाशों से भरे हुए थे. जब रेलवे ट्रैक पे हम जा रहे हैं तो वहाँ पे मार मार के लोगों को फेंका हुआ था. बहुत अच्छा रहा क्योंकि रियलिटी जो है वो लोग ही बता सकते हैं जो उन्होंने एक्चुअली फेस किया है. किताबें नहीं, आपको किताबें तो आपको फिगर्स बता देंगी. 10 लाख लोग मारे गए. जो मुसलमान लोग थे वो हिंदू लोगों से कर्जा लेते थे. तो ये लोगों के मनों में जो लाला बोलते थे, जो मनी लैंडर था ना उसको बोलते थे लाला या कराड़, ये वर्ड यूज़ करते थे. तो उनके मनों में ना बड़ी नफरत थी इन लोगों के प्रति भी. ये हमें एक्सप्लॉइट करते जाते हैं, हमारा कर्जा कभी भी नहीं ख़त्म होता. मोस्ट यहाँ पे भी अटैक हुए ना, जैसे रावलपिंडी में अटैक हुए हैं. सबसे पहला अटैक मनी लैंडर के घर पे हुआ है. उसकी मतलब उसका ना एक डोंकी के उसको बांध के ना उसकी बॉडी को डोंकी पे डाल के भेज दिया था.
In India, the age of the common man was still to come. Communal hatred reaches fever pitch.
इन महीनों में लाखों आदमियों को बड़े-बड़े दुख सहने पड़े हैं.
Once more, I must honestly appeal to all who condemn things in honor.
With India engulfed in communal riots, the British government sends a new viceroy to transfer power by June 1948.
The British, by the end of 1946, were fed up with India. They wanted to hand over power. It seemed to them that the Indians couldn't agree on how power should be transferred, and the British decided that they needed a new figure, somebody who was more dynamic, who could somehow break the logjam. So they settled upon Lord Mountbatten.
Louis Mountbatten was a cousin of the King of England. He was of British aristocratic pedigree and, like many British aristocrats, served in the armed forces. Mountbatten was also a somewhat vain man, very fond of sort of dressing up and looking good, and considered to have legendary charm, just somebody who could get along with people through his charm.
The British military chiefs, the British political leaders, and Mountbatten himself in particular strongly favored a united India because it would have meant keeping the army whole, it would have been a stronger economic power. So his primary goal was to leave a united India.
Mountbatten conducts a series of meetings to find a solution for a united India.
In the first few weeks when Mountbatten got there, he had these one-on-one meetings with all the Indian leaders, with Gandhi, Nehru, with Jinnah. He got on quite well with Gandhi and particularly with Nehru, because Nehru wanted the same thing Mountbatten did. He wanted a united India. Jinnah, on the other hand, showed up to his meetings with Mountbatten, and all he could say was no. Now, you have to remember also that at this time, Mountbatten is hearing in one ear from Nehru, Jinnah's crazy, he's stubborn, he's this, he's that, not all these nice things about him. And so Mountbatten himself was also fed up with Jinnah, found him a very prickly personality, someone he couldn't reason with, and I think got fed up with trying to butt heads with him.
After 3 months of talks, Mountbatten makes a decision that will change the future of the Indian subcontinent forever. Oral history researcher Amandeep Kaur from Punjab University is meeting an 82-year-old partition survivor. Dilip Kaur was just 11 years old when communal violence struck her village.
ਪਿੰਡ ਵਾਲਿਆਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਅੱਖਾਂ ਬਦਲ ਗਈਆਂ ਸਨ ਉਹਨੇ ਆਖਿਆ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕੁਛ ਨਹੀਂ ਉਹਨੇ ਅੱਖਾਂ ਬਦਲ ਗਈਆਂ ਸਨ ਫਿਰ ਲੋਕ ਲੱਗ ਪਏ ਆਖਣ ਉਦੋਂ ਫਿਰ ਐਲਾਨ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਕਿ ਇੱਥੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਿਕਲ ਜਾਓ ਕਿ ਅੱਖਾਂ ਬਦਲ ਗਈਆਂ ਨੇ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਡਾ ਨਿਕਲਣਾ ਹੀ ਦੁਆਰੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਪਿੰਡੇ 'ਚ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਫਿਰ ਲੁੱਟ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੋ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਚਲੋ ਸੱਚੇ ਸੌਦੇ ਦੇ ਕੰਪੇ 'ਚ ਫਿਰ ਅਸਾਂ ਆ ਜਾਣਾ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਜੇ ਚੁੱਕੀਆਂ ਸਿਰ ਤੇ ਚੁੱਕੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਵਿਚਾਰੀਆਂ ਲੱਗੇਗਾ ਜਾਣ ਜਨਾਨੀਆਂ ਬੰਦੇ ਤੇ ਵਿਚਾਰੇ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਸਨ ਉਹ ਚਾਰ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਪਾਰਾ ਲਾ ਲਿਆ ਕਿ ਕੋਈ ਮੁਸਲਮਾਨ ਆ ਨਾ ਜਾਏ ਕੋਈ ਆ ਨਾ ਜਾਏ ਮੁਸਲਮਾਨ ਗਏ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਗੋਲੀ ਚਲਾ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਗੋਲੀ ਚਲਾਈ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨੇੜੇ ਨੇੜੇ ਕੰਪਦੇ ਤੰਬੂ ਛੜਨਾ ਬੜੇ ਮਰੇ ਫਿਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਤੇ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੀ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਕੰਪਦੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਯਾਦ ਆਉਂਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਉਦੋਂ ਤੇ ਕਲੇਜੇ ਤੇ ਰੁੱਗ ਭਰੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਉਦੋਂ ਆਨੇ ਆ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਟਾਈਮ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਆਇਆ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਬੜਾ ਔਖਾ ਟਾਈਮ ਕੱਢਿਆ ਸੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਰੱਬਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੈਰੀ ਦੁਸ਼ਮਣ ਤੇ ਨਾ ਆਵੇ
ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਮਰ ਗਏ ਸੀ ਫਿਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਕੀ ਕੀਤਾ
ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਫਿਰ ਧਰ ਕੇ ਕੋਈ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਅੱਗ ਲਾ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਉਸੇ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਉੱਤੇ ਕੁਝ ਪਾਇਆ ਕੋਈ ਕੁਝ ਪਾਇਆ ਲਿਆ ਕੇ ਮੋੜੇ ਮਾੜੇ ਕੱਚੇ ਭੁੰਨੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਦਾਦੀ ਮੇਰੀ ਮਰ ਗਈ ਸੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਹੀ ਛੁੱਟੀ ਸੀ ਦਾਦੀ ਦਾ ਕੀ ਨਾਮ ਸੀ ਮਤੇ ਉਹਦਾ ਨਾਮ ਲక్ష్ਮੀ
जज्बा था उन लोगों में वी कांट एक्सप्लेन वो अगर मुझे अपना घर छोड़ के खाली हाथ यहाँ पे यार मैं तो मर ही जाऊंगी लेकिन उन लोगों ने किया है
Mountbatten very rapidly concluded that Britain could not hold on that long. Things were falling apart. There was indeed a violence in the air, increasing communal division. In other words, the fruits of the divide and rule policy the British had pursued for 100 years had now begun to really, or the chickens had come home to roost.
On 3rd June 1947, the British government announced the plan envisaging the establishment of the independent states of Pakistan and India.
Mountbatten declares British India is to be divided into India and Pakistan.
It is with no joy in my heart that I commend these proposals to you. The proposal to allow certain parts to secede, if they so will, is painful for any of us to contemplate.
The world has laid time alone for the most onerous and difficult task which we have to perform.
The British had said that they would stay till June of 1948. And in fact, when Mountbatten agreed with Jinnah and Nehru to create Pakistan, to split the subcontinent, there was some confusion even among the British about when they were leaving.
A day later, Mountbatten brings forward Independence Day to 15th August 1947, 10 months ahead of schedule.
Mountbatten not only decided that it couldn't wait till June 1948, he rather on a whim chose the very date at which the Japanese had surrendered to him, the 15th of August, and said, okay, so this will be the date that India will get its independence, and everything, in other words, suddenly had to happen. They had barely 6 or 7 weeks to actually divide the country and partition it and leave.
With just 10 weeks to go to independence, the task of partitioning British India begins.
They would have these meetings about, okay, how do we, particularly the army, that was the most important part. How do you divide up the army? Who gets which units? How much equipment needs to go to one side or the other? But then you had to sort of decide other things. There were 6 printing presses in India. None of them were in what would become Pakistan territory. And the Indians didn't want to give them, give Pakistan a printing plant to print money.
While the bureaucracies are concerned about the division of resources, there was still a border to be decided.
It was broadly understood that the borders would be drawn in sort of Muslim majority areas. And so the perception was that if you went towards the areas where Muslims were numerically in a majority, that was likely to be where Pakistan was coming. But many people remained unsure.
Under the watchful eye of Pakistani security forces, thousands of Indian Sikhs cross the border to Pakistan every year. They are here to visit one of their holiest sites, the Nankana Sahib. But some pilgrims take this opportunity to go in search of their lost roots.
I remember I was sitting on a cart and there were people going on horses left and right, covering our movement, and there was some firing. I remember.
Dr. Balwinder Singh has returned to Pakistan for the first time since his family fled during partition. He is taking a quick detour from his pilgrimage to visit his father's college.
Army school. ਇਹ ਕਦੋਂ ਬਣੀ ਬਿਲਡਿੰਗ?
ਇਹ ਉਦੋਂ ਹੀ ਬਣੀਆਂ ਨੇ 1930 ਤੇ 35 ਦੇ ਦਰਮਿਆਨ ਬਣੀ।
ਉਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ। My father was about 1928 and 29, 30, 32. I am certainly overwhelmed. Certainly I am emotional about it. It's very nice. It was more than a dream of my life that to visit the college where my father had been. He has been talking, even in his last days, that FC College. It was a wonderful college. What are these colleges? You people don't know where we have studied. People haven't forgotten 1947. People never wanted it. People from both countries suffered. It has been created. Why? It should not have been there. It's not wanted. People don't want it.
Months between June 3rd, when the announcement was made, and August 15th are the critical period. Small groups of fighters would go from village to village, but what they were doing is they were forming self-defense militias. They're saying, and these people, they're going to attack us, they're going to rape your daughters, they're going to burn your houses down.
They robbed each other, they wounded and maimed each other. I don't think that there was really any difference in the kind of violence that happened.
Say a group of 50 would turn into a mob of 500. A group of 500 would turn into a mob of 5,000. And then once you have that mob, then the violence takes over and there's a mob mentality.
There was a huge amount of sexual violence. Some of them had their breasts cut off, some of them were paraded naked. In both countries, it is estimated that about 100,000 women were raped and abducted and taken away and forcibly married. There is no aggressor and no victim. Hindus or Muslims or Sikhs, all were equally violent towards each other.
Trains were going back and forth carrying refugees. They were attacked and people within them were killed and you know, they showed up on the other side of the border and they would show up dripping blood and with carriages full of corpses. There's one story of a girl on a train platform who was crying on top of a pile of bodies and somebody came and gave her some gasoline to drink and then set her on fire.
There was a lot of violence from families towards their own women, particularly Sikh families who killed a large number of their own family members, mostly women and some children, because they feared that those women could get raped and the community would get polluted.
The violence was incredibly brutal. It's very hard to explain what took over people's mentality. Jinnah was extremely shocked and saddened by the violence. He wanted his own state, he wanted an independent state, but the last thing he wanted was instability and violence.
I think that they didn't expect that the violence would be on such a scale. I think they were taken aback by it. It's not that they didn't try to control it, they did try. They tried with whatever they had at that time, but once the fear had set in, it was not easy to control.
Back in New Delhi and Karachi, the leaders are getting ready for the fanfare of independence. But the border is yet to be decided.
On 14th August 1947, the last Viceroy of India, Lord Mountbatten, formally transferred power to the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan.
I thank Your Excellency for your expressions of goodwill and good wishes for the future of Pakistan.
12 hours after Pakistan declares its independence, India celebrates.
At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
The countries are finally independent, but the borders have not been announced.
Mountbatten had intentionally not published the maps because he wanted nothing to interfere with the big party.
The drawing of the lines was itself a problem. It was known that it was going to be a problem, which is one of the reasons why Mountbatten didn't reveal the lines till the 18th of August, 3 days after independence, so that the lines themselves would not become a factor in the independence celebrations of both countries. But lines meant lives.
The official lines split Pakistan into East and West Pakistan, separated by more than 2,000 kilometers. The province of Punjab is to be partitioned right in the middle, between the two countries. People migrate to become citizens of the country of their choice.
So then you had these huge refugee columns that extended for miles. One went on for 50 miles, hundreds of thousands of people at a time crossing on foot from one side of the border to the other.
People talk about it as the largest human migration known to history so far. The exact figures are unknown to everyone and vary from estimates of 12 million to 15 million.
There was also a lot of killing, a lot of rape, a lot of violence, a lot of property destruction. It's estimated 1 million people lost their lives before and after partition.
There was huge violence in the foot columns because people walking on foot were extremely vulnerable. And they were crossing. As the columns crossed each other, they attacked each other.
The leaders, who had hoped for a peaceful migration, are shocked at the scale of violence.
Gandhi was extremely distraught by partition. I mean, he had fought against this for years. He called it a vivisection of Mother India. You know, he felt it was a wound, an amputation.
None of them had expected or anticipated the scale of the tragedy. And it is often said that those who demanded partition were the ones who regretted it most when they had to witness the horrors that were unfolding because of it. Mountbatten, as we know with hindsight, wrongly claimed that if the process was prolonged, there would be a lot of violence and massacres, and that if the decision was made, announced, and implemented immediately, the violence would cease. He was wrong.
The Muslims who were involved in the movement for Pakistan must have rejoiced that they had won the goal of achieving the country that they wanted to achieve. But millions and millions of others had not been involved in the movement, but they had to live with the consequences of the decision that was taken.
A local school has invited 82-year-old partition survivor Dilip Kaur to speak to their students.
You all know about partition? Yes, ठीक है. जब पार्टीशन हुई है तो ये पाकिस्तान से मूव होके इधर आए हैं. आपने ना, इनका नाम है बीबी दिलीप कौर जी, ठीक है? तो आपने इनसे क्वेश्चंस पूछने हैं जो आपके माइंड में आता है. मतलब आप सोचो, इतना बुरा वक्त था वो 47 का, जब सारा घर छोड़ के, सबका सामान छोड़ के, जब एम्प्टी हैंडेड ये इधर आए हैं.
जैसे हिंदू मुसलमान को मार रहे थे, मुसलमान हिंदू को मार रहे थे, आप उस मुश्किल समय से बच के आ गए, तो उधर आप क्या फील कर रहे थे? मतलब
सूलते बड़ा कुछ किया, आख्या आया जेड़े मर गए ने वो तो दुनिया तो गए, उन्होंने वास्ते तो हले गले बोल गए ने, हले साडे ते भी पे ने, पर असी तो माड़ा मोटा अपन जाना बचा के तो निकला. असा कोई चीज़ प्रेम की गई नहीं, माल नहीं किया, कोई जायदाद नहीं की, कोई घर बार नहीं किया.
ਜਿਵੇਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਤੋਂ ਆਏ ਹੋ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਵੀ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਸਮੇਂ 'ਚ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਨਾ ਇਨਸਾਫੀ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ, ਜਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਲੋਕ ਮੇਰੇ ਭਾਵਨਾਵਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਾਏ ਹਨ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਗੁਜ਼ਰੀ ਹਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਹਾਲਾਤਾਂ 'ਚ?
ਇੰਨੀ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਮਝਦਾ, ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਮਝਦੇ, ਮਾੜੀ ਮੋਟੀ ਸਮਝਦੇ ਇੱਧਰ ਦੇ.
ਚਲੋ ਜੀ, ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਿੰਦਾ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਨੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਵੀ ਪਾਰਟੀਸ਼ਨ ਟਾਈਮ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਘਟਨਾਵਾਂ ਘਟੀਆਂ. ਹੁਣ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੱਸੋ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਬੁੱਕਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪੜ੍ਹਿਆ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਅੱਜ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਕਿੰਨੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ ਖਰਾਬ ਹੋਈ ਪਈ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਰਿਲੇਸ਼ਨਸ਼ਿਪ ਹੈ ਆਪਣਾ ਖਰਾਬ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਪਿਆ ਹੈਗਾ, ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੱਸੋ ਬੇਟਾ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਕੰਟੈਕਸਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ.
ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਕੰਟੈਕਸਟ 'ਚ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਇਹ ਕਹੂੰਗਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਵੰਡ ਹੋਈ ਆ ਇਹ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਹੀ ਮੀਨਿੰਗਲੈਸ ਸੀਗਾ, ਇਹਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਮਤਲਬ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਬਣਦਾ. ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਚੰਗੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਮੁਸਲਿਮ ਤੇ ਹਿੰਦੂ ਸਿੱਖ ਸਾਰੇ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਰਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਸੀਗੇ. ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਡਿਵਾਈਡ ਐਂਡ ਰੂਲ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ,
ਤੇ ਇਹ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਮਤਲਬ ਸਭ ਦਿਮਾਗ 'ਚੋਂ ਕੱਢਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਕਿ ਮੁਸਲਮਾਨ ਮਤਲਬ ਬੁਰੇ ਨੇ, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਕਿ ਸਿਮਰਨ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਬਾਹਰ ਵੀ ਤਾਂ ਹਿੰਦੂ ਮੁਸਲਮਾਨ ਇੱਕ ਦੂਜੇ ਨਾਲ ਰਹਿ ਹੀ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਤੇ ਸੋਚਿਆ ਜਾਏ ਕਿ ਇੱਥੇ ਕਿਉਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ. ਇਹ ਸਭ ਮਤਲਬ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਜੇ ਸੋਚੇ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਕੁਝ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ, ਤੇ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਥਿੰਕਿੰਗ ਕੱਢਣੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਹੈ.
The year 1947 was an extremely momentous one in the history of India.
For the first time since partition, Dilip watches images of the trains that she travelled on.
ਗੱਡੀ ਦੇ ਦੁਆਲੇ ਤੇ ਆਈਆਂ ਕੋ ਵੱਡਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਲਿਸ਼ਕਦੀਆਂ ਤਲਵਾਰਾਂ, ਤੇ ਗੱਡੀ ਨਾਲ ਖਲੋਂਦੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ. ਪਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਗੱਡੀ ਤੋਂ ਨਾ ਕੋ ਉਤਰੇ ਤੇ ਨਾ ਕੋ ਪੀਏ. ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਹਿਸਾਬ ਨਾਲ ਪਿਸ਼ਾਬ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਮੂੰਹ 'ਚ ਪਾਇਆ, ਨਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਤੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਨਾ ਕਰਦੇ.
ਨਾ ਦੇਖੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਖੁਦ ਗਿਆ ਸਭ ਇਹਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਰੋਤੇ ਰਹੇ ਛਾਂ ਆ ਕੇ ਵੀ ਘਰਾਂ 'ਚ ਬਹਿ ਕੇ ਵੀ ਰੋਤੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੀ ਬਣ ਗਿਆ ਇੱਕ ਸਾਡੇ ਅੰਗਰ ਹਟਾਏ ਗਏ ਨੇ ਅਜੇ ਚਲੋ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਹਿੰਦੁਸਤਾਨ 'ਚ ਤੇ ਹੈ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਦਿਲ 'ਚ ਬੜਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈ
10 weeks after independence, Pakistan attacks India over disputed territories. It is the first of 4 wars the countries will fight, among many other skirmishes.
Partition is very central to understanding the India-Pakistan relationship today and the continuing hostility that the two countries have towards each other.
Partition, I think, is the crucible in which the identities of this country were forged, and particularly their rivalry. These two countries that have so much alike still view each other as intense opposites, intense enemies, and that goes back to this experience of partition, the violence and the stories that people hear, and the sense that somehow this wound was created by the other side, and the other side is to blame for it. I think it still plays out today.
Had the British not spent 100 years trying to create the sense of separateness and difference, tried to instill and encourage a division in the national movement on communal lines rather than ideological lines or anything else, and had not thereby directly contributed to the horrors of partition, we would not be living with its tragic legacy in the decades after.
India could have become independent as an undivided nation. That is entirely possible, but that did not happen. It happened that India became divided because of the way the British played politics, because of the way our leaders gave into that politics as the price of power that they wanted.
Should a partition have happened? Or would it have been better if it had not happened? The truth is, nobody can answer that question.
ਵੀਰ ਸ਼ਿੰਗਾਰਿਆ ਜੇ ਨੀ ਸੁਖੀ ਲੱਦੜਾ ਨੀ ਗੁਰਾਂ ਦਿੱਤੜਾ ਮੈਂ ਕੋੜੀ ਚਾੜਿਆ ਜੇ ਬਸ
ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਸੀ, ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ।